Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the last Sherlock Holmes story, Chapter 4, Part 3. On this previous note, I fell asleep in my chair. When I awakened, I found all my certainties in ruins again. Sherlock Holmes, my Holmes, the face behind the Ripper's mask, in the cold lights of dawn. My conclusion seemed utterly fantastic, and the arguments which had led me to it had all fled. But I could no longer delay. I packed my meagre possessions into two trunks, and I moved that very morning in the hotel. That evening, I summoned Mary to dine with me, and unchaperoned. We had a sherry and the soup, hock and the lobster. Be on with the beef and champagne with the souffle. Over coffee, I begged her to let us be married. And immediately, I explained with passionate insistence that I was finding it quite impossible to sleep soundly whilst there was a dreadful murder while these dreadful murders continued. Knowing as I did that all my ways living in a household bereft of any male defender I was finding it quite impossible to sleep soundly whilst these dreadful murders continued, knowing as I did that all my ways living in the household bereft of any male defender. In vain, Mary protested that respectable women were not threatened, that the scene of the crimes was Whitechapel and not Camberwell, and that the risk was therefore insignificant. I brushed aside these objections, How could she tell that such a maniac might? How could she tell that such a maniac might do next? No one could deplore indecent haste more than I, but I could not help my tender feelings. As she had observed, I was looking unusually pale and strained. The remedy was in her hands. Not until the light of my life was safe under my own roof would I recover my health once more. At length she yielded to my importunate demands, and parted on the understanding that our union would take place as soon as the necessary arrangements could be made. The next morning I dispatched a letter to 221B Baker Street. Although I could not face the prospect of meeting Holmes again, much less of sharing rooms with him, I had every reason for wishing to remain on good terms with my former friend, rather than making a brutal severance. Therefore, I bent the truth to suit my purposes. The letter ran in this way: My dear Holmes, much to my respect, I'm unable to welcome you home in person, but I have a good excuse, the best in the world. In fact, Mary and I have married. You will no doubt be somewhat surprised at the suddenness of the nuptials. Indeed, I was myself. The fact is that poor Mary has been completely unnerved by these Whitechapel horrors. After the last atrocity, she broke down altogether. As you know, there is no man in the Forrester household to exert a steadying influence, and between the two of them, the woman succeeded in convincing themselves that they were destined to be the murderer's next victims. Of course, I pointed out that the respectable women were not at risk, and that in any case the sense of these crimes was unbearable. Whitechapel, not Camberwell. But you know how it is. Once the sex take an idea into their heads, nothing would do. But we must marry without further delay. I agreed only to remove Mary from the influence of this unhealthy morbidity. As for Mrs. Forrester, I believe she has gone to stay with relatives in Yorkshire. I'm delighted to hear you've been able to bring Professor Moriarty's career to a fitting end. If you have indeed ensured that these ghastly killings have reached their term, all England owes you thanks. Naturally, I'm eager to hear the details from your own lips. I sincerely hope that all the to-do that goes with setting up a household will not too long prevent me from satisfying this desire. By way of my honeymoon, my wife and I are vagabonding it along the south coast, spending a few days in each town. A letter to my club will reach me without undue delay. Yours truly, Watson. I posted a letter from Brighton, where I spent the next 5 days in seclusion, counting on Mary's acquaintance. I had made arrangements for us to be married at a small church in Marylebone. I thought it best to spend the intervening days out of town to avoid the possibility of an embarrassing encounter with Holmes. At the end of the following week, Mary and I were duly united, and we left London that afternoon on the coast of Norfolk. That afternoon in the coast of Norfolk. Cornwall is scarcely at its best in November, but it is very quiet. In that quiet, with Mary at my side, I found the strength to face and master the shocking truth of which I had so innocently stumbled. I soon realised that altogether I had now resolved my immediate personal problems. I was still facing a very grave moral dilemma. I had reason to believe that Sherlock Holmes had committed 6 brutal murders and might as well attempt more. What was I to do? Under the moral circumstances, of course, I would simply have informed the police, such indeed my duty, and by failing to do so, I myself was breaking the law. But how could I possibly walk into a police station and announce that I believed that the Whitechapel murderer to be a man celebrated throughout the world for his services in the fight against crime? Even supposing I was not at once clapped into a straight white waistcoat with evidence I could adduce in support of my wild accusation, only some scraps of circumstantial miniature that would not even convict even a known criminal, together with my unsupported word that I had seen Holmes mutilating the body of Mary Kelly. And in any event, even if by some miracle I did succeed in persuading the police to investigate a man that had doubtlessly considered about as likely a suspect as the Prince of Wales, what would come of it? All the objections which Holmes had advanced when I proposed telling Lestrade about Professor Moriarty applied with equal force in the present case. The police could take no measures of which Holmes would not instantly be aware, and which he could not evade with the greatest of ease. The primary advantage we possessed was that Holmes had no reason to suppose that he was suspected. The advantage could hardly be overestimated, since it virtually cancelled out the man's natural superiority. As long as he did not even exert his powers, he might yet be foiled. But if he were put on his guard, it would be hopeless. Any resort of the authorities was therefore out of the question, and for they were bound to bungle the affair. But if I could not pass on my responsibilities to others, then I would have to shoulder them myself, whatever my personal feelings. And I was to cultivate Holmes's friendship and keep a close watch on his moods and movements. And if he ever again took up his knife, I would have to be there to fetch the police and hand the murderer over to justice. For a moment I regretted my impulse that had made me leave the Baker Street rooms. My surveillance would have been much easier had I stayed there as soon as close quarters. Holmes must have remarked the change in my manner, but that would have been fatal. Besides, my task was by no means as arduous as it first appeared. For if Holmes maintained the pattern which he had been in such pains to point out to Lestrade, how he must have amused himself! What fearful fun! Then the only times at which a close watch need to be kept were the few days at the end of each month and at the weekend immediately following. It could be done, and I had to do it. What I needed, therefore, was a residence close enough to Baker Street to make frequent droppings in appear natural, and a practice sufficiently amending to me for my larger duty of protecting the public from Jack the Ripper. By the end of November, by now the end of November was drawing nigh, and when the threat of another outrage, and with the threat of another outrage, on the 28th I travelled back to London, leaving Mary safe at Cormer. My plan was to put up at an hotel for the weekend, and this was abruptly altered by a letter which I found awaiting for me at the club. This envelope was addressed in a familiar handwriting, and enclosure read as follows: My dear Watson, I reread your communication on the 16th with much interest and with regret that my business in Switzerland made it impossible for me to attend your wedding. Please accept my best wishes for the future and remember kindly to your wife. I fear your eagerness to know more about the demise of the late and unregretted Professor Moriarty will have to be restrained for some time yet. The Russian embassy has intimated that the imperial authorities are prepared to offer me a carte blanche as to shed any light on the mysterious case of a certain gentleman of Odyssey. I know not who Mr. Turpole was that Caesar's ministers should concern themselves with his fate, and the case of process certain for features of interest which in themselves induced me to accept. It seems that the man was found scattered at a desk at his hotel room. There was a volume of Lermontov's verse open before him. There was no blood, no disorder. Indeed, the only indication of foul play was that the gentleman's hand was missing, and the only one occupant of the room was Turpoff's valet, who was apparently staring mad and unable to make any sound beyond a continuing series of farmyard imitations. I depart for Odyssey tomorrow, and whatever the outcome, I accept to remain away from London for some time. Now that Jack the Ripper is gone, I find the city stale, flat, and unprofitable. I really cannot bring myself to take any interest in any petty misdemeanours of our insular criminals. Perhaps the continental villain still has not quite ensnared all traces of imagination and creativity, and from his work. But if he too fails me, I can at least purchase a Baedeker with a sketchbook and turn tourist. At all events, do not neglect to send word of your address once you've settled. Miss Hudson will forward your correspondence. Yours truly, Sherlock Holmes. As I scanned those lines, I experienced a relief that was almost physical. Every phrase seemed to breathe normality, and to speak of the Holmes that I had known and respected for so long, rather than the fearsome monster I had steered to meet. Besides, I rejoiced to hear that he was removing himself voluntarily from the scenes that had witnessed these hideous outbursts of destructive violence. A period abroad might work a power of good. It was serenity I had not known for many weeks that I returned to Mary that evening to inform her that we could complete our honeymoon without any further interruption. The hands of the clock which tells the time of my narrative must now revolve quickly. 3 months passed by, and I acquired the modest practice of Paddington district, and my days were spent quietly, usefully attending to the ailments of my patients and to my responsibilities as a husband and a householder. But I am not penning my autobiography, and my only contact with Sherlock Holmes during the period was only 2 typical vivid letters I received from him, which I shall make no vain attempt to paraphrase. The first was dispatched from Daguerre in Bengal on the 4th of January. It ran: Dear Watson, no doubt you have been wondering at my long silence. I've been travelling lately in parts not noted for regularity of their postal systems. Having cleared up the Odyssey mystery, I found to my not complete amazement that the coordinating of the Russian authorities had decidedly waned upon my discovering the identity of Mr. Trepov. With 4 very large gentlemen visited my hotel room in the early hours of this morning, carrying carrying a coffin. I felt the time had come to take my leave. Fortunately, I had detected the odour of cyanide of potassium in my champagne, sent up by the anonymous admirer early in the evening. Not that I care for sweet champagne in any case, that rightly should take the trouble to get these details right, and was concealed in the chimney with the cortege gold. Using just about every form of transport I'd known to man, and several previously unknown to me, I made my way through the Crimea and south to Baku. I then crossed the Caspian Sea and struck out into the great Karakum desert, which I emerged with a number of interesting incidents in Afghanistan. The Russians were, of course, expecting me to head into the Balkans or across the Black Sea into Turkey, and I was determined to disappoint them. It is no exaggeration to say that the information I now possess, if communication to certain parties, will result in the overthrow of the present regime in Russia. You will know how little interest I have in such an event, but only can hardly blame the Tsar's man for preferring my silence. I must therefore keep out of the way until next month, after which the matter will cease to be of any moment. To while away the time, I have just spent a few days in Lahash. One of the Viceroy's staff happened to mention in the course of conversation that no European had ever penetrated this forbidden city of Tibet. I naturally needed no further inducement. Well, it may still be true that no European has ever been there, but one very ancient and venerable Buddhist ascetic visited the Lama last month in a pilgrimage, and had removed his magnificent beard, an expression of transcendental sublimity. You might well have remarked this astonishing resemblance to yours, very truly, Sherlock Holmes. And that's part 3 of chapter 4, the last Sherlock Holmes story. And now we shall leave it. And that's part 3. Part 4 will be next week. I hope you all have a great week. See you next week.